Proposition 2 authorizes bonds to fund existing housing program for individuals with mental illness. Legislative statute. Plain language, borrow money to provide housing and support for the homeless mentally ill. The background. Counties are primarily responsible for providing mental health care for persons who lack private coverage. Counties provide psychiatric treatment, counseling, hospitalization, and other mental health services. Some counties also arrange other types of help for those with mental illnesses, such as housing, substance abuse treatment, and employment services. In 2004, California voters approved Prop 63, also known as the Mental Health Services Act. This act provides funding for various county mental health services by increasing the income tax paid by those with incomes over $1 million. This income tax increase raises $1.5 billion to $2.5 billion per year. In 2016, the legislature created the No Place Like Home program to build and rehabilitate housing for those with mental illness who are homeless or at risk of becoming homeless. The state plans to pay for this housing by borrowing up to $2 billion. The state would borrow this money by selling bonds, which would be repaid with interest over about 30 years using revenue from the Mental Health Services Act. This means less funding would be available for other county mental health services. No more than $140 million of Mental Health Services Act funds could be used for the No Place Like Home program in any year. The bond payments would be about $120 million in a typical year. Now, this proposition is actually kind of an in-run around the California court system. This proposition would require the transfer of money from the Mental Health Services Act to this new No Place Like Home program. Because the Mental Health Services Act was approved by voters, the courts would need to evaluate whether the use of this money for the new No Place Like Home program is in line with what voters were trying to approve when they voted for it. This bill will also issue more bonds, and the courts need to decide if voters need to approve these bonds. However, if this prop passes, court approval will no longer be needed because the voters clearly approve of it. Long story short, Proposition 2 would establish a new program that would provide housing for the mentally ill homeless by diverting money from the existing state mental health funds and by borrowing more money via bonds. What does it do? Proposition 2 finalizes the No Place Like Home program. It authorizes the transfer of up to $140 million annually from the existing Mental Health Services Fund to the new No Place Like Home program, a program that provides financing for permanent housing for people with mental illness who are homeless or at risk of chronic homelessness. Prop 2 also allows for $2 billion in bonds to help finance all of this. Fiscal impact. The legislative analyst has been a little waffly on this, indicating that the assessment of this proposition's cost would depend on whether or not the California courts would have approved this without voter approval or not. The bottom line seems to be this. Prop 2 will transfer up to $140 million annually from the Mental Health Services Fund to the No Place Like Home program, which will add no new costs to the budget since it's just a transfer, and will add $2 billion of debt in the form of bonds. But if this proposition fails and the courts approve the No Place Like Home program anyway, then these costs could still apply regardless of the failing of this proposition. Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un hate the Daryl Johnson show. Make your donation below to prevent Russian election hacking and North Korean missile tests. From Yes on Prop 2. Yes on Prop 2 delivers the proven solution to help the most vulnerable people experiencing homelessness in California. Prop 2 builds housing and keeps mental health services in reach for people, the key to alleviating homelessness complicated by mental illness. More than 134,000 people are languishing on our streets, huddled on sidewalks, sleeping under freeways and along riverbanks. As many as a third of the people living in these unsafe conditions are living with an untreated mental illness. Each year, hundreds of people living in serious mental illness die in pain and isolation. These deaths are preventable. Prop 2 tackles this public health crisis that is straining our neighborhoods, our businesses, our firefighters, and emergency services. It renews our sense of community and focuses on helping save the lives of the most vulnerable among us. Prop 2 means building 20,000 permanent supportive housing units. It helps with treating mental health and substance abuse services. Decades of research shows providing people with a stable place to live, along with mental health services, promotes healthy, stable lives, reduces public health costs, and reduces blight. Prop 2 is not a tax and brings no cost to taxpayers. This proposition is just to cut through the red tape. This state funding has long been earmarked for these specialized types of mental health services and treatments. Prop 2 strengthens partnerships between doctors, law enforcement, and homeless service providers who face the challenge of providing effective care to people suffering from mental illness and substance abuse. Without the foundation of a stable home connected to mental health care, people suffering from serious mental illness are unable to make it to doctor's appointments and specialized counseling services, often showing up in emergency rooms as a last resort. A 2018 RAND study found that the Prop 2 approach is beginning to succeed in Los Angeles County after only 1 year. 3,500 homeless people off the streets. 96% of study participants stayed in the program for at least 1 year. Taxpayers saved more than $6.5 million in 1 year alone. Participants visited the ER 70% less, saving healthcare costs and easing the burden on emergency responders. From No on Prop 2. Please vote No on the No Place Like Home Act, which should have been called the Bureaucrat and Developer Enrichment Act, because that is who we feel will most benefit at the expense of those suffering with the most severe mental illnesses. No Place Like Home is counterproductive because it spends billions in treatment funds that Prop 63 dedicated to the severely mentally ill 14 years ago. If passed, we strongly feel that NPLH will cause more homelessness by forcing more mentally ill people into severe symptoms that could increase the numbers living on the streets. Proposition 2 is costly, up to $5.6 billion to raise $2 billion for housing projects after interest. It won't all go to housing because the housing bureaucrats have already guaranteed themselves $100 million to run the program, and they have also agreed between themselves to take the entire $140 million yearly as administrative expenses, whether or not they need that amount to pay off the bonds. Developer subsidies will cost the public even more. Prop 2 is unnecessary because the legislature already authorized counties to pay for housing for their severely mentally ill Prop 63 clients in 2017 via AB 727. Counties, which can now accumulate Mental Health Services Act capital funds for up to 10 years, can now do pay-as-you-go, both to build housing and to pay rent subsidies for these clients. Counties do not need to pay out billions in interest on bonds, unnecessary state administrative expenses, and developer subsidies to do so. Counties know their mentally ill clients' treatment and others' needs, as well as what housing is already available. Only they can determine whether their MHSA funds are best used to pay for treatment or to build housing in their localities. Proposition 2 does nothing to address systemic legal barriers. Many neighborhoods fight hard to keep the mentally ill away by zoning areas so that supportive housing cannot be built there. It is senseless to pay out billions in interest and expenses to borrow money that may sit unspent because of local opposition to supportive housing projects with severely mentally ill tenants. These issues should be handled at the county level, not the state level. We cannot afford to divert more money from the state's existing mental health funds. Doing so will cause more individuals with severe and persistent mental illness to lose housing and result in even more of them being incarcerated and living on the street. This prop is very unusual because it involves the state of California borrowing and spending more money at taxpayer expense. Now I have to admit, they almost got me this time. I was studying this and near the end I was ready to cast a yes vote, but then I looked a little deeper and I called the No on Prop 2 campaign and had a nice long discussion with them, and that changed my yes vote to a I don't know what to do vote. So I first wanted to vote yes because mental health homelessness is clearly a problem if you walk through any number of California big cities. It's not an issue where you can just say go help yourself or stop relying on others, because relying on others is all they can do at a certain point. I can't expect capitalism to solve this problem because it requires a heart incentive and not really a head incentive, although there is a case to be made for nonprofits and charity organizations. But in the end, I was okay with experimenting with a plan that would help them get off the street and get housed. However, the No campaign explained two realities. This program will raid the existing mental health fund and spend it on programs that they feel are less effective at treating people with severe mental illness. Currently, each California county has access to state mental health money, and they can already use this for housing as needed. Prop 2 takes control from the counties and forces a state-level program that won't adequately meet the needs of some of the most severely mentally ill. The Mental Health Act money that we authorized 14 years ago is for treatment, not housing, and there are other channels in place to allow for housing. California, I don't know what to do with this, and I have no strong opinion, but the fact is, many parts of this plan are already in effect, and so even a no vote may only delay what seems to be inevitable. The Yes campaign is so confident in their victory in big funding that they don't even reply to requests for more information beyond an auto-reply that directs you to their website. So, if you vote yes on Prop 2, you are voting to approve the creation and funding of a new homelessness prevention measure for the mentally ill, taking money from our existing mental health funds. If you vote no on Prop 2, you are voting to rely on the state's current measures to address the situation. The Daryl Johnson Show is split on this, but for the sake of local control and treatment-based solutions, I'll vote no on Prop 2. But I want to reiterate, it's not about money this time, but more about process and strategy.